What happens when a city of 15 million people simply runs out of water? Right now, this is not a hypothetical question. It is a countdown unfolding in real time, and Tehran sits at the center of it, staring down a summer that could permanently reshape the future of an entire nation. If this is your first time on this channel, do yourself a favor, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what the rest of the world is barely paying attention to. You're going to want to follow this story closely. There's a term that water scientists use when a country has pulled out more water from the ground than nature can ever replenish. They call it water bankruptcy. Think about that phrase for a moment. Not financial bankruptcy. Water bankruptcy. It does not mean a country is running low. It means a line has been permanently crossed. The wells have been pumped too deep. The rivers have been tapped too hard. The underground reserves that took thousands of years to fill have been emptied in mere decades, and no emergency. Policy, no single rainy season, no amount of political speeches can undo what has already been done. Iran crossed that threshold years ago. Most of the world did not notice. And now, in the middle of a brutal war that has shattered its energy infrastructure, crashed its economy, and left its leadership scrambling for survival. Water bankruptcy is no longer a warning buried in a scientific journal. It is something 35 million Iranians are preparing to live through this summer, not as a minor disruption, not as a brief period of rationing, as actual sustained water shortages in one of the hottest climates on the face of the earth. Pause on that number, 35 million people. That is more than 1/3 of Iran's entire population. Being told by their own government officials that reliable access to water cannot be guaranteed during the months when temperatures regularly soar past 40 degrees Celsius, and in some southern provinces, past 50. At 50 degrees, a human being without access to clean water begins experiencing dangerous physiological breakdown. Not after days, after hours. The elderly, the very young, the chronically ill. These are the populations that die first when infrastructure fails during extreme heat. And the infrastructure in Iran is failing. Tehran, the capital, the beating political heart of the Islamic Republic, is the most vulnerable city in the entire country. Within its limits live roughly 10 million people. Across the greater metropolitan region, that number swells to 15 million. It is the third most populated city in the Middle East. It consumes nearly a quarter of all water used in Iran. And in the summer of 2025, before the latest wave of war, before fuel depots were bombed, before the economy spiraled even further, Tehran's 5 major reservoirs had dropped to just 12% of their total capacity. 12% for a city of 15 million people. And that was before things got worse. That was the baseline from which the decline continued. To understand how Tehran arrived at the edge of this cliff, you have to look back not weeks or months, but decades. Because this crisis was not born from the war. The war simply stripped away every last layer of protection from a catastrophe that had been building for half a century. Iran ranks among the top 5 groundwater extractors on the planet. It pulls more water from beneath the earth than almost any other nation in the Middle East. Since the year 2000, the number of water extraction wells has nearly doubled across the country. Logic suggests more wells should mean more water. But here is the devastating reality. The total volume of water actually brought to the surface dropped by 18% over the same period. Twice the wells, less water. Because the underground reserves were collapsing faster than anyone in power was willing to acknowledge. The ancient balance between what nature returns and what humans take had been permanently shattered. In and around Tehran, the consequences are physically visible. The ground itself is sinking. In some districts, land subsidence exceeds 10 inches per year. Roads crack and crack again no matter how many times they are repaired. Pipelines shift and rupture. Buildings develop stress fractures in their foundations. The earth is literally collapsing into the voids left behind where water once existed. Water that accumulated over centuries and was drained in a single generation. One good year of rain cannot replace what took a millennium to build. For more than 3,000 years, Iranian civilization used a remarkable system called qanats, gravity. Fed underground tunnels that channeled water from mountain aquifers to settlements at exactly the pace nature permitted. These were engineering masterpieces. They were so brilliantly designed, so ecologically sustainable, that arid civilizations across the ancient world studied and copied them. The Qanat system understood something fundamental that modern Iran forgot. You can only take water as fast as the earth gives it back. After the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran abandoned this ancient philosophy entirely. The government embraced diesel-powered deep tube wells and massive dam construction projects. The thinking was straightforward and seductive. Modern pumps could bring up water faster. Bigger dams could hold more, and for a while it appeared to work. Production numbers impressed politicians. Ribbons were cut, speeches were made. Nobody asked what would happen when the aquifers finally said no. But the pumps did not care what the aquifer could sustain. They extracted water at whatever rate the motor could achieve. And within a few decades, the consequences arrived with merciless clarity. Salt water pushed into coastal aquifers, making them useless. Underground water tables collapsed across Iran's most critical agricultural regions. And Tehran, a city that ancient Persian engineers once praised as sitting on one of the most water-blessed geological formations in the entire region, now rests on top of aquifers that modern environmental scientists classify as effectively dead. The dams built at enormous cost and celebrated with enormous political theater have mostly failed to deliver on their promises. Many operate far below their designed capacity. The shallow reservoirs trapped behind them lie exposed to Iran's ferocious summer sun. In many locations, more water evaporates into the atmosphere than ever reaches a household tap. The infrastructure designed to save water has, in practice, accelerated its destruction. The system built to be Iran's hydraulic insurance became a machine for speeding up evaporation, while the aquifers beneath continued their irreversible decline. Then there is the threat arriving from beyond Iran's own borders. Two rivers essential to Iranian water supply, the Helmand and the Hari Rud, originate in Afghanistan. Under Taliban governance, Afghanistan has been constructing its own dams upstream. The Pashtun Dam, which began operations in August 2025, gives Afghanistan the capacity to control up to 80% of the Hari Rud's average flow. Mashhad, Iran's second largest city, depends on that water. Iran now receives less water across its borders at the very same moment it has less water beneath its own soil and less capacity to capture whatever precipitation still falls from the sky. Climate change has accelerated the catastrophe at a pace that has stunned even pessimistic scientists. Rainfall in some Iranian regions has collapsed by as much as 85% compared to long-term historical averages. The autumn of 2025 was the hottest and driest fall recorded in Tehran since 1979. The snowpack in the Alborz Mountains, the range that has historically supplied Tehran with fresh water through seasonal melting, has shrunk dramatically. Less winter snow means less spring melt. Less melt means less river flow. Less river flow means less water reaching the already depleted reservoirs. And rising summer temperatures mean faster evaporation of whatever small amount of water remains. Iran's total renewable water resources have declined by more than a third over the past 20 years alone. Over 30% of the nation's natural water wealth simply vanished. That water is not coming back within any time frame that matters to the people alive today. Now here is where this crisis transforms from alarming to genuinely terrifying. 90% of Iran's water goes to agriculture. 83% of Iran's food is produced domestically. These two numbers, placed side by side, reveal something critical. Water and food in Iran are not separate systems. They are a single interconnected system. When water becomes unreliable, crops fail. When crops fail in a country of 92 million people already crushed by 100% inflation, with 7 million citizens already classified as food insecure, the result is not a policy discussion in a government meeting room. It is human suffering on an enormous, visible, and politically explosive scale. Farmers who have worked the same land for generations are watching their fields turn to dust. Orchards that fed communities for decades are being abandoned. The water that made agriculture possible is disappearing, and with it, the livelihoods of millions of rural Iranians who have no alternative source of income and nowhere else to turn. And this is where the war enters the equation and transforms a chronic disaster into an acute emergency. Israeli airstrikes on March 7th targeted IRGC-linked fuel storage facilities in the Shahrud district and nearby areas of Tehran. The fires that followed burned for days. Reports described oil leaking into drainage channels and water canals. Videos surfaced showing waterways turning black with petroleum contamination. In a CIT already desperately short of clean water, having your remaining water infrastructure poisoned with industrial oil is not a footnote to the war. It is a direct blow to the survival of millions. But the damage you cannot see in those videos has been even more devastating. The strikes destroyed approximately half of Iran's total refinery capacity. And this is where you need to understand the chain reaction that makes every system fail at once. If you are still watching, and this analysis is giving you a perspective you did not have before, take 1 second to hit the like button. That small action tells the algorithm this kind of serious, detailed content deserves a wider audience. And if there is someone in your life who cares about global affairs, about the real crises shaping our world right now, send them this video. It might be the most important thing they watch today. Water treatment plants require electricity to run. Pumping stations need fuel. Desalination units depend on consistent power. The distribution networks that carry water through pipelines into homes cannot function without energy. When energy becomes unreliable, water becomes unreliable. When rolling blackouts strike neighborhoods for hours at a time, the pumps maintaining pressure in Tehran's aging pipe system stop functioning. Filtration systems that make water safe to drink shut down. Sewage treatment plants that prevent contamination of remaining groundwater go offline. Everything is connected. Pull one thread, and the whole fabric unravels. Iran's energy collapse and Iran's water collapse are not two separate emergencies running in parallel. They are one single emergency expressing itself through two different systems. Damage the energy grid and the water system breaks. Repair the energy grid and the water system recovers. The war damaged both at the same time, and nobody has managed to repair either one. The Iranian government has been forced to acknowledge what conditions on the ground make impossible to deny. Iran's water industry spokesman reported in May 2026 that precipitation had fallen below normal levels across 11 provinces, and that Tehran was among the hardest hit as summer approached. The official figure released to the public: 35 million Iranians will experience water shortages during the hottest months of the year. Summer in Iran is punishing. Tehran regularly surpasses 40 degrees Celsius. Southern provinces like Khuzestan, Sistan, Baluchistan, and Kerman have seen temperatures exceed 50 degrees in recent summers. At those extremes, dehydration becomes a medical emergency within hours. The people most at risk, the elderly, the very young, the chronically ill, are the ones with the fewest resources to cope, and the ones with the least visibility to a government already overwhelmed by crises on every front. When a government tells 35 million of its citizens that water may not be available during the most dangerous heat of the year, it is not delivering a routine administrative update. It is describing a public health catastrophe, wrapped in the calm language of a bureaucratic press statement, as if measured words can somehow cushion the brutal reality they describe. President Pezeshkian's own words expose how far beyond manageable this situation has gone. In November 2025, he appeared on national television and warned that without rain, Tehran's water would have to be rationed. And if rain still did not come, the government would need to consider evacuating the city entirely. He did not frame relocation as one theoretical option among many. He called it an obligation. He said the government had no other choice, his exact words. When we said we must move the capital, we did not even have enough budget. If we had, maybe it would have been done. The reality is that we no longer have a choice. It is an obligation. An Iranian president, the leader of a country sitting on the world's fourth largest natural gas reserves and ranking among the top 10 crude oil producers, publicly declared that the capital may need to be abandoned because of water. The estimated cost of relocating government functions to the Makran coastal region sits around $100 billion. Iran's national wealth fund currently holds roughly 35 to 37 billion. The country cannot afford to move away from the crisis, and it cannot afford to fix the crisis where it stands. That is a dead end without a visible door. The social dimension of this emergency is what should terrify Iran's rulers more than anything else, because water has already proven it can bring millions of Iranians into the streets. In the summer of 2021, years before the current war, Arab communities in Khuzestan province launched what the world came to call the Uprising of the Thirsty. They took to the streets because they believed their province's water was being siphoned away to benefit Tehran and the political elite. Security forces cracked down with violence. The protests spread regardless. The anger was too deep to be beaten into silence. In November 2025, university students in Tehran demonstrated after water supplies to their dormitories were cut off. Not because of an airstrike, not because of military action, because the city's own water system could not deliver consistently during a drought winter. Students already furious about political repression and economic decline found themselves unable to access the most basic necessity of life inside their own university. The symbolism was devastating. In January 2026, massive protests swept through Tehran, bringing millions into the streets. The combustible mixture was hyperinflation, energy shortages, and food prices climbing beyond what ordinary families could bear. But trace those food prices back to their root, and you find the same origin. Years of water crisis quietly destroying agricultural output. Long before the first missile was launched, consider what happened in November 2019. The trigger for Iran's largest popular uprising in decades was a gasoline price increase of just a few cents per liter. The government killed hundreds in response. If a modest fuel price adjustment could shake the entire regime to its foundations, what does a summer of empty taps and extreme heat for 35 million people produce? That is not a rhetorical exercise. That is a question the IRGC is trying to answer in real time, because the fury that water scarcity creates is different from any other kind of political anger. It is primal, it is universal, and it cannot be negotiated away with promises or beaten back with batons. You cannot arrest thirst. The cruel irony is that the IRGC itself bears deep responsibility for this disaster. Its construction arm, Khatam al-Anbiya, one of the largest engineering conglomerates in the Middle East, has controlled enormous portions of Iran's infrastructure development for decades. The dams that worsened evaporation, the deep wells that drained aquifers, the diversion schemes that enriched political insiders while degrading the resource base. Many of these were designed, built, and operated by IRGC-connected contractors. Analysts have identified what they call a de facto water mafia, a network of politically connected entities that consistently chose profit over sustainability. They awarded contracts to allies and blocked reforms that would limit their control over the water sector. The institution sworn to protect the Islamic Republic has been structurally aligned with the very practices that bankrupted its water. Kaveh Madani, a former Iranian deputy vice president and current director of the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health, coined the term water bankruptcy specifically to describe Iran's condition. He has acknowledged that recent rainfall brought minor, temporary relief to some regions, lifting certain reservoirs from catastrophically empty to merely severely depleted. But he emphasizes that this reprieve is extraordinarily fragile. The aquifer damage has not reversed. The structural mismanagement persists. The energy disruptions that cripple pumping and treatment systems remain. A fleeting gift from the weather is masking a permanent structural catastrophe, and that gift vanishes the instant the summer heat arrives. Peter Gleich, co-founder of the Pacific Institute, one of the world's premier freshwater research institutions, has observed that Iran's water system enters each new crisis at a lower baseline. Every drought pushes the floor deeper. Every year of over-extraction removes another layer of resilience. The system being asked to endure this summer was already critically compromised before the war, the energy collapse, and the heat wave arrived. Scientists describe this as a collapse spiral. Each turn weakens the system further, which means the next shock strikes something more fragile. Iran is now deep into that spiral. Climate stress, aquifer depletion, war damage, energy failure, and agricultural decline all rotating simultaneously. All feeding each other, all converging in one merciless summer. No rescue can arrive in time. Desalination covers just 3% of Iran's water needs. Gulf neighbors like Kuwait and Qatar meet 90% of their demand through desalination. But they built that capacity over decades with vast wealth. Iran has neither the time nor the money. Recharging aquifers demands generations of careful stewardship. Relocating a capital of $15 million costs $100 billion. That is money that nobody has, and it takes longer than any political term allows. The international community watching from the outside must confront an uncomfortable reality. Even if sanctions were lifted tomorrow and peace arrived overnight, the physical damage to Iran's water systems would persist. Aquifers do not refill because of diplomatic agreements. Contaminated waterways do not clean themselves because a ceasefire is signed. The damage is physical, it is geological, and much of it, according to scientists, is permanent on any human timescale. No lever exists that can change what the next 6 months bring to the taps of 35 million Iranians. If this video has opened your eyes to something you had not fully grasped before, then this channel is doing exactly what it was built to do. Subscribe now, turn on the notification bell, and leave a comment telling me which part of this crisis you want explored deeper. Your engagement is what fuels independent, in-depth analysis like this, and every single subscription matters more than you know. The French Revolution began in breadlines. The Soviet Union collapsed when shelves went bare. Iran's own uprising of the thirsty was born in water queues. The January 2026 protests that the IRGC killed thousands to crush were driven in part by food price explosions. Rooted directly in years of water scarcity destroying agricultural yields, the pattern is not hidden. It is one of the oldest and most reliable dynamics in all of political history. Governments do not collapse because of abstract frustration. They collapse when the most fundamental acts of daily survival, finding bread, finding fuel, finding water, become impossible. When the failure is not a headline people scroll past on a phone, but a physical sensation felt in their own bodies, multiple times, every single day, Iran is approaching that breaking point, not as a theoretical projection, not in some distant worst-case scenario. This summer, in weeks. History does not wait for governments to catch up. It moves at the speed of thirst, at the speed of hunger, at the speed of desperation. And this summer, inside Iran, history is accelerating. More than 2,500 years ago, the great Persian king Darius carved a prayer into stone. He asked his God to protect the land from 3 afflictions: invaders, famine, and lies. In the summer of 2026, Iran confronts all 3 at once. The invaders came with airstrikes in February. The famine is visible in food lines stretching through cities, in 105% food inflation, in 7 million people who do not have enough to eat. And the lies exist in the gap between an oil minister declaring there is no cause for concern and a water spokesman admitting that 35 million citizens will face shortages. Between a government projecting strength and a president confessing that moving the capital is no longer a choice, but an obligation. Darius would recognize every enemy his prayer described. What he would not recognize is a state that summoned those enemies through its own choices, a government that spent its wealth on nuclear ambitions and proxy wars and the violent suppression of its own citizens. While the water that nourished Persian civilization for millennia drained silently away beneath the earth. The 35 million Iranians facing an uncertain summer do not need ancient analogies to grasp what is happening to them. They will understand it the moment they turn a tap and nothing flows. They will understand it when the thermometer climbs past 40 degrees, and there is no escape. They will understand it in the price of bread, in the fear on their children's faces, in the silence from a government that chose missiles over reservoirs and control over care, and when summer reaches its peak, when the taps go dry and the heat becomes unbearable, and 35 million people stand inside a country that cannot provide the one thing every human body demands. The question of what this government has truly offered its people will not be debated by analysts sitting in comfortable studios. On the other side of the world, it will be answered by the people themselves, in the streets, under a burning sky, with nothing left to lose and no reason left to stay silent. And when that answer comes, the water that Iran allowed to vanish beneath the ground will prove itself the most powerful force of all, not because of what it does when it flows, but because of what it unleashes when it is gone. The story of Iran is now being written in the dust, in the heat of a summer with no mercy. History is in motion, and the countdown to the inevitable breaking point has already begun.